Guys, I finally did it! When I did my playthrough and subsequent video for Persona 1, I learned about the Snow Queen route after the fact, so I didn't end up doing it for the video. And the Persona 2 additional content I just didn't really have the desire to do at the time because sometimes little gamers get burnt out. Anyways, I know it's been like 5 months since my last early Persona video and like a year plus since my Persona 1 video, but I finally locked in, and this will be the last of the early Sona content before we jump into the weird and wacky world of Persona 3. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on Persona 1 and 2's alternate scenarios. Of course, we will be working in chronological order, so we shall start with Persona 1's Snow Queen route. I really have to start by just sharing with you all how excited I was to do this part of the game, because as some of you may know, your 5th party member in Persona 1 can be selected by you. You have the choice of Brown, Ayase, Ellie, or Reiji. I didn't know that the 5th member was a choice when I originally played the game. I thought you got to play as all of the characters eventually, so I accidentally picked Brown because he was the first one we got, and I was just like, yeah, come along, and I didn't realize that that would have locked me out of the other characters. Reiji is considered to be the best choice because he has the most relation to the Seebeck plot, which is the main plot of the game. And after seeing him in Persona 2, I'm so sad I didn't pick him because he actually is my king, but I'm digressing a little bit. My point was that for the main game I ran with Naureen, Maki, Mark, Nanjo, and Brown. So I was super excited to play the Snow Queen route because I could basically play as all of the characters I didn't get to play as in the main route, except for Reiji. Plus, the whole Snow Queen route is very Yukino-centric, and I am literally Yukino's ride or die, guys. I love Yuki, she is my girl. So with all that excitement in my heart, I headed into the Snow Queen route. To unlock it, there's a series of checkpoints you have to do while you're in the school the second time after visiting Maki in the hospital. I followed a walkthrough for this part, but basically you learn from various people around the school about like this cursed mask. Allegedly, the school put on the play The Snow Queen, but every student who put on the mask was like cursed to die young. Apparently the only person who ever lived wearing the mask was our teacher, Miss Psycho, which again, you guys might know from Persona 1 or Persona 2, she's in all of those games. But yeah, we end up finding the mask sealed in a box that's covered in talisman, and that's not sketchy at all, so we open it and we take the mask with us. Just before we leave the school to continue with what would be the Seebeck route, like the main route of the game, Miss Psycho finds us and we tell her about the mask and the curse. She puts the mask on basically just to convince us that it's all a bunch of baloney, but then it turns out to actually not be baloney, and Miss Psycho gets overtaken by whatever demon spirit thingy is in the mask. It's not clear at this point. The demon spirit thingy calls itself the Snow Queen and encases the entire school in ice. She tells us that the only way to save the school is to collect these mirror shards. So, like the school and Miss Psycho, because Miss Psycho got like frozen. So we have to collect these mirror shards to save her. So we do that. So your base team is Naureen, Ayase, and Yukino, and you have your choice of Brown, Ellie, and Nanjo as your 4th and 5th member. I took Nanjo because that's my boy, and I remember liking Nanjo more than Brown in the original plot. And I took Ellie because I haven't played any part with her yet, and I wanted to know what was up with her in Persona 1, because I did play like the additional, or not the additional, but like the alternate route in Persona 2 where you get to either go with Nanjo or Ellie. I did play through that dungeon, and I really liked Ellie in that one, so I was kind of like, ooh, I'm so excited to see her as a youngin'. After configuring our team, we head to the cafeteria and we see poor Toro, who's in Persona 2, and I didn't know. Like, I knew that he was in Persona 1, but I didn't remember seeing him in Persona 1, so I saw him and I was like, oh my god, he's like one of the rumor mongers in Persona 2. But yeah, he attacks us because Ayase rejected him in like the worst way possible. Like, she actually took his heart out of his chest and stomped on it. Like, she was so mean, and she's just so airheaded, she didn't even notice. But yeah, we do end up beating him and his persona, and then we are free to enter the 3 towers that contain the mirror shards. I originally had to redo this part because if you actually fight Toro before you have Ellie or Nanjo, like before you have both slots filled up, Brown will come with you by force. And I was like, no, not again. So I had to redo that part, but it was fine. And then I had my team. Anyways, back to these towers. So the very first one is the Hypnos Tower, it's a very sleepy place. There are a total of 3 mirror shards in this tower. The first 2 are found by waking up Tadashi, Tamaki, and the principal and vice principal in the dream world. I actually didn't remember Tadashi and Tamaki from Persona 1 that much, but I did remember them from Persona 2, and I loved them, so it was really cute to see their how their relationship started in Persona 1. Vice Principal Hanya is always a trip, and in this game that's no different. But the point to this is that we got our mirror shards without too much difficulty, so yippee! Once we climb to the top of the tower, we meet Kumi, one of the girls who put on the Snow Queen mask, and her demon was Hypnos, who we take out to acquire the 3rd mirror shard. Yeah, like I have comments on some of the other tower leaders, but I didn't really have any comments for Kumi. She was kind of just there. I did die to this boss the first time, to Hypnos, after spending like 4 hours in the tower, and I was so cheesed. Then I redid it, and guys, this boss was so gentle with me the second time, and I really was like, damn, you couldn't have done that last time, so I didn't have to waste another 4 hours. I also noticed that at this point that I had set the game to expert. And I question why I did that to myself, because I went into the Snow Queen route knowing that it was more difficult than the main route, and I still was like, yeah, we're playing on expert. Anywho, after the Hypnos Tower comes the Nemesis Tower, which kind of looked like a pyramid, so it was kind of pretty cool. Unlike the Hypnos Tower, we meet the guardian of this tower like really early on. And yeah, her name is, and sorry if I butcher any of the names, her name is Michiko. Michiko Matsudara. And she is quite the character. She's very like showy and gaudy and haughty. She has like this really like blonde hair. And she's honestly like the complete opposite to Kumi, who was the guardian of the last tower. She was just Kumi was a lot more reserved. But yeah, like some of the interactions that Michiko had with the party were so funny. Like she straight up asked Nanjo to be her pet, and I died. I laughed so hard. Basically, the gimmick for this tower is that she tells you there's no time limit. I forgot to mention that earlier. There is a time limit for all of these towers. However, if you do take too long in the tower, the boss is stronger. You can find 2 mirror shards in this tower by not getting the mirror shard Michiko tells us about, which is a bit backwards. I know. Basically, if you go to get the mirror shard she tells you about in the middle of the tower, then Toro and the masked dude who is in the library, whose name I can never remember, they are getting tortured via milk ingestion and push-ups respectively, and they get angry that you kind of like abandon them, so they don't give you the 2 mirror shards they find. So yeah, if you want to get all 12, which is what I was going for because you do get a set, like armor set for it, then you want to skip that mirror shard. Michiko's boss was actually pretty based because she's weak to all magic. So because my team is very like magic heavy, easy peasy lemon squeezy. I'm assuming for this tower that if you don't bring Nanjo, Michiko comes onto Brown. And I actually would have loved to see that because Brown has like way less of a, shall we say, stick up his ass than Nanjo. So I feel like it probably would have been really funny. But we will save that for another playthrough. After that comes the 3rd tower, which is the Thanatos Tower. I tried this one first, but I got like immediately clapped. So I decided to head over to the other dungeon, the Devil's Peak, to grind some levels and equipment. Okay, and then I went to the Thanatos Tower, and y'all, when I say this was the most stressful dungeon I have ever been in, this was the most stressful dungeon I have ever been in. Immediately, we're introduced to Muriko, the head of the Thanatos or Death Tower, and we're introduced to the gimmick of this tower, which is the fact that every time you or your friends die in battle, they lose the ability to use their persona. Never fear, because you can get your persona back from Tartarus, which is located on the 2nd floor of the tower, which is great. However, the tower is a total of 8 separate floors, guys, and guess what? If you get ambushed on the 8th floor right before the boss and your party gets kamikazed, you will have to walk all the way back down to floor 2 to get their personas back. Yeah, I spent a total of 7 hours in this dungeon between collecting the like 6 mirror shards in this tower. There are so many, they're just scattered all over the place. And like all of the combat and buying new equipment, because when I came in, I was like 8 levels lower than the weakest demons, but I was tired of grinding, so I was just like, what the hell, I'll just like go. And the most egregious of all of this, like putting all of that aside, was the fact that I had to climb the tower. Not once, not twice, but 3 goddamn times, because right at the top, an ambush surprise would occur and wipe me all out. Cue the music. Been a little while. Anyways. Yeah. By the time I was doing the boss, my knuckles were white, guys. My legs were shaking when I was fighting Yuriko. And, the funniest thing was, my entire team died to this boss, except for my main man, boy with the earring, Naorin Todo himself. Someone get my man a cigar. He earned it. He also earned 102,000 XP from that boss fight, totaling about 6.5 level ups, and he was 12 levels stronger when I saved after doing the whole dungeon, meaning I was in there for a while. The actual story of the Thanatos Tower I did find really compelling. I loved Yuriko's story of sharing her fear of change and growing old with us, and I loved how it showcased the strength of each girl. It showed how caring Yukino is by really emphasizing how worried she is for Miss Psycho and how much she wants to save her. But it also kind of justified the narrow-mindedness she was feeling. She and Ellie both had towards Yuriko, because Yukino was so worried that she was blinded to the suffering that Yuriko was actually going through. And I really loved Ellie because it showed Ellie has kind of been our walking thesaurus up until this point, and this tower was no different. It showed she's very analytical. She's a very smart mind in the traditional sense, and she was very quickly able to piece together Yuriko and essentially psychoanalyze her. But she didn't really have that emotional understanding that Ayase had. This tower really emphasized to me how emotionally intelligent and empathetic Ayase was, by hammering home how well Ayase was able to relate to Yuriko's emotions and just understand them. And basically on site, she didn't she did come to understanding, but she was able to pick things up about Yuriko that the rest of the party wasn't able to very quickly. So yeah, Thanatos Tower. Story, yay. Characters, yay. Gameplay, cancer. But by the end of the Thanatos Tower, I had all 12 mirror shards and was ready to confront the Snow Queen. So we head to the courtyard to do just that, and after a very grueling boss fight, more on that later, we learned that the mask was attached to Miss Psycho's best friend, Tomomi, from back in the day, who was cursed by the mask when Psycho let her take on the role of the Snow Queen, hence the hatred towards Psycho, because basically people were like, oh, she let her have the role, and she just let you have the role, she threw. And then yeah, she kind of died too by wearing the mask, so it was just everybody was like, oh, she's scared of the curse. But I'm digressing. But yeah, it was kind of valid from Tomomi's point of view. But anyways, by defeating Tomomi, we accidentally separate her persona, the Night Queen Asura, from her, which was basically the last of that demon's humanity, resulting in the Ice Castle becoming even more Ice Castle-y. There are even more floors, and we have to fight an even worse boss. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this dungeon very affectionately, because Old Sona and old RPGs in general are kind of known for being more difficult. But oh my god, the last dungeon, the Ice Castle, is tough. It's hard. When I went in there the first time, my entire party outside my MC, who had been the sole survivor of both the Thanatos Tower boss and the Tomomi boss fight, were 20 levels lower than the demons in the tower. Not to mention, the place is 11 floors, with only a single save point on floor 9, which is honestly more generous than I expected. And all of the floors are a freaking maze. I really liked how in the actual story of the tower as we were climbing up, it did really allude to the Seebeck route, which is considered the main quest of the story, as I mentioned, because it did include kind of a distorted version of Maki and the other boy who, for the life of me, I cannot recall who it is, and there's no mention of him in any of the wikis, so I don't actually know who he is, but I know that he is relevant in Persona 1. This is why we play additional content while we're playing the game and not a year later, because otherwise you don't understand all the Easter eggs. But yeah, after encountering them, you do actually get to fight the Night Queen boss herself, and it can be grueling if you are not properly prepared. I climbed the tower a total of 3 times, because the first time I did the fight, there was no hope in hell of me doing it. The second time, I was adding up my damage on a calculator as I was doing that run, and I did 12,000 damage, and it took me forever to find a wiki that showed how much health this boss had. But I did find one eventually, and I learned that she had 15,000 health total. So I did 12,000 out of 15,000. So I was like, okay, this is doable. But unfortunately in that run, I didn't have enough revival items or any way to cure sick, which is a ailment that does damage to you every turn. And the boss also heals itself too. So once you get to like the end of the fight, if there's only like a few party members left alive, you probably don't have the damage output to be able to keep up with her healing. So yeah, it just isn't fun. So I had to go up a third time. I had to go buy a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I'm like, it was a lot. When I tell you guys this boss fight took me multiple days between classes and bedtime, I am not joking. It took me like 2 days to do the boss fight. Like, a lot of people online were recommending to be at like level 60 when attempting it, and I think my MC was level 54 and everyone else was way lower, so that might have also been why it took me so long. But yeah, it was a long fight. But irregardless, I did end up beating the Night Queen, and I restored the school back to normal, and the ending of the quest right before the team sets off to look for Maki and Mark and start the events of the Seebeck route was really heartwarming and sweet. I love that the Persona 1 group, while classmates, weren't super familiar with one another like at the start of the game, and some of them kind of even disliked each other like Nanjo with Ayase, but by the end they come to appreciate one another for what they brought to the table. Like in the specific example I named, like in Nanjo's case, he actually thought Ayase was a great morale pick. So yeah, everyone has a thing that they're good at, and everyone should appreciate the beauty in all people. So honestly, really, my only complaint about the Snow Queen route, and it's an echo of what other people have said in the past, is the fact that it doesn't actually lead into the main game. I wasn't expecting a full-fledged storyline because of the way it was described as like a side route, but it really is its own whole thing. And while I did play the quest on Expert and the Seebeck route on Regular, which might have something to do with it, I found the Snow Queen route to be so much more difficult and unforgiving than the main route, which might also put new players off if it was the canon start to the game. Furthermore, I understand why it wasn't a lead into the main quest, because at the end of the day, it does serve as filler that kind of develops some of the other characters more, rather than actually serving a function in the overall Seebeck narrative. But I still wish the two could have been a bit more connected rather than two separate routes. But yeah, I also but again, I understand the perspective from a new player point of view, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. The very, very last thing for Snow Queen route is the Devil's Peak, which I briefly mentioned earlier. Once you beat the Night Queen, you do gain access to the upper floors of it. It's an incredibly challenging dungeon. Floors 8 to 11 have to be done all in one go, and I didn't know that, so I actually climbed to floor 10, backtracked to save, and then had to redo all of the very long and tedious boss fights. Floor 12 is the hardest, but it's pretty straightforward. There's essentially 6 rooms with 6 different fights, and doing them all rewards you with a bragging rights badge. Admittedly, the badge does nothing. It's just to say you did it. I will admit, I did not finish this dungeon. I finished the first 2 of the 6 boss fights on the 12th floor, and then unfortunately the third one had enemies that had really strong physical attacks, which half my party was weak to. And for some reason, my party's accuracy seemed to crap out too. They were missing so frequently. I tried to see if I could fuse a persona that nulled physical so I could put someone in the front and hopefully complete the fight, but I didn't have the right cards, and the thought of climbing back down and having to redo floors 8 to 11, which took me a pretty long time, sounded so draining that I just didn't really want to finish it. But yeah, that's Persona 1 Snow Queen route. So on that note, let's start talking about Persona 2, starting with Innocent Sin, of course. Y'all, I really want to make a Persona opening tier list once I've covered more entries in the series, and I'm gonna spoil it right now, but the opening for the PSP version of Innocent Sin is my favorite opening in the series. It's so nostalgic and it really sets the mood for the whole game. The music's a banger, the animation is beautiful, and I love this opening so much. But yeah, unlike with Persona 1, I didn't have to make a new file to access the theater, which is the content I will be covering. I thought I had to make a new file because I loaded into the final dungeon, and I was like, no, I'm gonna have to start over again. But lo and behold, there was a way out, thank God. So, the theater. It hosts a few side quests that are only available in the PSP version of Innocent Sin. The first one you have access to is the School of Heart Part 1, which has us visiting St. Hermelin, which for those of you who don't know, is the school Yukino went to. My girl, it's the school in Persona 1. Honestly, y'all, someone at Atlas went up to bat for Yuki, because Snow Queen Quest is essentially all about her and the development of her conviction to help people like Miss Psycho did, and we get her in like 2/3 of Innocent Sin, and she gets a theater quest at her school. Like, Yuki stans stay winning. Last little comment before I start talking about the actual bread and butter content, but I felt really sick while playing these quests. I was very dizzy and nauseated, and the opening lines between Ginkgo, Eikichi, and Maya actually made me laugh so much I thought I would throw up. I did not record that part, unfortunately, I forgot, but I am so happy to be back with the Persona 2 party because like they are honestly like my kids. I actually love them all so much. So yeah, let's get into the quest. Basically, it starts with, we were trying to interview a very popular teacher at St. Hermelin, and that brings us to the school, Maya, Eikichi, Lisa, and Tatsuya. And y'all, we meet this man, and he is creepy as hell. He tells us all about this like phone program he uses called Ambrosia to help mold his students, which is the reason allegedly why his students are very smart and are like the ideal people. But we also comment on the fact that like all of these people are like they're really smart based off their grades, but they're also like really beautiful, like almost fake looking beautiful, like too beautiful basically. We're about to leave the classroom when we hear the voice of a disembodied girl begging us to save the people in the class. The quest is split up into 2 parts, and I honestly didn't expect to love it as much as I did. The whole mystery surrounding the classroom and the mysterious girl, or Spring Break Alice, aka Akari, kept me really engaged. Not to mention, I didn't really expect a fully fleshed out plot dealing with school bullying, corruption in the education system, suicide, grief, familial bonds, and love out of what was effectively just a one-off side quest. I really adored Rose and Akari in this quest. The end message of the quest being how the transition into adulthood can be scary, but by relying on teachers and other adults in our life who have made the transition already, also tied beautifully into the overall message of the main game, which is to allow yourself to dream and believe in what you can accomplish. Not to mention, again, the quest dialogue between the team was just really funny. Maya was shown to be just so kind and big sisterly to the main team, and it also just showcased how she works as a reporter and how dedicated to the truth she is, and, you know, uncovering the truth for the victims and helping as many people as she can. Remembering the end of Innocent Sin and the fact that there literally would have been no canon time for this quest to take place in between when the team remembers one another and like the actual ending of the game also serves to just kind of make me appreciate Maya that much more, because it was like that moment of what we could have had. Also, super side note, but I was obsessed with these 2 portraits for some side characters in the quest, and take this one from the other side quest for good measure. I really loved all of these character designs. I thought they were all really cool. And yeah, and that brings me to the second I guess the third, because the School of the Heart is split up in 2. So the second quest, or third, the Persona Thief. It is the only other side quest you can access in the theater, and it has the team investigating Karu High for Nameless, which is the piano player in the Velvet Room, because for some reason there are a lot of rests in his music where normally there wouldn't be, and essentially his music makes up like the collective unconscious kind of thing. So when there's rest, like it's concerning, and like the rest could be detected back to this high school. So we end up uncovering a nefarious plot that involves stealing people's personas in order to use them as conduits to spread rumors. It honestly, I know like that sounds kind of serious, but it honestly kind of is a pretty unserious plot. It's kind of silly, but it's very Eikichi focused, so that was really enjoyable. I didn't really like the delivery of this quest as much because there was a lot of telling, not showing. The screen would cut to black and one of the characters would narrate what was going on. I thought it was lazy writing at first, but then they addressed why they did that at the end. So while I didn't jive with the format at first, I did think it was really clever for what they intended to do. And finally, that brings me to the alternate scenarios in Persona 2, Eternal Punishment, starting with a Lone Shadow. Part 1. I talked about these very briefly in my actual Eternal Punishment video, but I only did half of the first one, so it wasn't the most informed take. A Lone Shadow 1 introduces us to Detective Shiori, who is investigating this side's Joker, Tatsuya Tsuno, because he was the one that killed her brother 10 years ago in place of our Tatsuya. Because basically how the alternate universe works is just because something didn't happen doesn't mean like something has to fill like the void in the timeline. So because Tatsuya and Maya didn't get attacked by Suno because they never met, Shiori's brother died in Tatsuya's place. Our Tatsuya ends up saving Shiori from the Joker, or Suno, and we get a lot of insight into the backstory behind why Tatsuya acts the way he does in the main story, which was very cool. Alone Shadow 2 takes place right after and opens with Shiori and Tatsuya's dad listening to the recorded explanation of personas and the other side. And y'all, this gotta be the greatest misremembering of all times, because every single time I think about Persona 2, I keep thinking the Sooo dad is dead. But he wasn't dead, he was just betrayed by his partner and arrested on false charges, which is why he is never around. And for some reason, I can never remember that, and I always just think he's dead. But yeah, he's a security guard in this timeline. He's not a cop anymore, he's a security guard. But yeah, Alone Shadow clears up the fact that their dad is still in their lives, and so is their mom. And they did in fact have a missing persons report put out on Tatsuya, which they take down after Shiori shares with him the recording of Tatsuya explaining the other side in Personas, which damn, he has some understanding parents, because if I was like, no, I have a mission, I'm coming from an alternate timeline and there's demons and stuff, like my parents would put me in the hospital. But his parents are very understanding. They end up taking away the missing persons report and it's all good. It's all hunky-dory. The actual main body of Alone Shadow 2 takes place while Maya and company are confronting Kandori in the lab with Nanjo. While Tatsuya is there for Maya, he's also searching for Shiori, the detective from part 1 that I mentioned. She went missing there at the lab. I really love this portion of the quest because the visual novel type style really gives us a direct link into everything Tatsuya is feeling, and while on Maya's end at this point of the game, Tatsuya is still a rather elusive figure, through Alone Shadow we get to see just how much this poor boy is going through and how much he's shouldering. When he found Shiori, and it turned out that they had been experimenting on her and they basically turned her into like a demon type thing, and he realized that there was yet another person that he got close to who was seemingly beyond saving, I felt his raw pain, and it actually got me choked up, guys. That's without even mentioning his interactions with Eikichi, which had me on my knees. The trope of like one person remembering like the alternate timeline when all of their friends forget is like so, I love it so much. It's so special to me, and it always just like wrecks me, and like Persona 2 just does it so well. Gone Without a Trace is the third and final additional scenario, and it has us trying to recover Demon Shiori back to her normal self. To do so, we have to travel to the Dreamlands, which is essentially the place where all of human ideas of gods and deities and demons comes from, and we have to find all the pieces of Shiori's severed psyche. Unlike the last two quests, this one takes place when Tatsuya is with the rest of the team, so we all go to the Dreamlands together, which is good because it is a very dangerous place and it took a lot of brainstorming to even come up with a way to get there. Once we do manage to get there, we learn that we have to track down the 11 pieces of Shiori in the Dreamlands, 11 pieces of her psyche. Some through fighting, some through negotiating, just various stuff. I really like how philosophical Persona can get sometimes, and one of the segments in this dungeon in particular questioned the party about whether or not the self really exists, and doing this additional segment while knowing how the game ends and just seeing how torn up and sad Tatsuya looks as he says, "Of course I exist," just really gets the point across that in a world where timelines can be rewritten and multiple versions of a character exist or a person exists, especially when our Tatsuya isn't the one in what is essentially being treated as the correct timeline, it really accentuates the question of, is he real? Does he exist? And is what he's doing right now something that really matters? Now, I really liked the concept of this dungeon, and I loved the character interactions, but the actual dungeon itself got really tedious after the 4th tower. The worst part was, I didn't do this dungeon all in one sitting, and I couldn't find any way to check which pieces I did have. Like, I couldn't find them in my inventory or anything, so I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. So I literally was just going through it and being like, I think this is number 7, I hope this is number 7. Thankfully, the party did drop the obligatory, "This is number 9, only 2 left to go." So I knew where I was finally after that. But honestly, like I said, I did love the character interactions, and I really liked the actual bosses and getting to talk to the different gods and deities, especially because for one of them that like sticks out in particular was Izanami. Izanami and Izanagi. And yeah, and basically Katsuya like explained the story. He said he opened it with saying anyone who's Japanese would know the story, but then he still explained it because obviously this is like the English release. So not all of us know the story. I didn't know the story, but I thought it was really interesting to like get those like pieces of kind of history, and like it was very philosophical, and it treated itself very seriously, and I just really enjoyed that. However, like I said, the dungeon itself was very long, and like the terrain was very repetitive, and the random encounters, like it just became very grindy, and like I just like by the end I was just like, oh my gosh, I just want to leave. Eventually I realized that my characters were so much higher leveled than all of the random demons that I could escape from every battle, and that did help expedite the process, but geez Louise. And honestly, the ending of the quest itself kind of made all of the grinding worth it. Persona 2, in my opinion, really perfected those bittersweet endings, and this quest is no different. We do accomplish what we set out to do by saving Shiori, but when she wakes up in the hospital, she has a brief conversation with Anna, who is visiting Noriko, which you might remember we helped them out as well during the main story. And we learn that Shiori didn't wake up in time. Like, she didn't wake up until the events of the game, like the final events of the game, have already happened. And so she and Tatsuya will never get to actually say any of the things they wanted to say to one another. And it was just really sad. This also kind of cemented that you really should play, in my opinion, the Gone Without a Trace quest after beating the actual game. Because I think the base ending is better when you go in hopeful that Tatsuya will be okay. So yeah, that's been all of the extra content for the first 3 mainline Persona games that I didn't cover in my original video. Honestly, doing this has really cemented in my mind that I'm way too sentimental of a person to revisit games, because I just remember how much I love the characters, and then I feel tempted to replay their stories even though I have a backlog the size of Timbuktu. But yeah, onwards and upwards to even more games. I'm thinking Wind Waker and Sonic the Hedgehog next. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.